Welcome to the channel, everyone. We're so glad you're here with us today. Before we dive into today's story, we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Whether you're joining us from a bustling city or a quiet town, we want to connect with you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on our next special story coming your way tomorrow. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Now let's get started with today's adventure. The price of disrespect, one tourist's regret. After a Buckingham Palace incident, on a crisp afternoon outside Buckingham Palace, the air was thick with anticipation. Tourists milled about, snapping pictures of the iconic red uniforms of the British Royal Guards and the towering, majestic gates of the palace. Among them stood 26-year-old Ethan Davis, an American tourist who had come up with what he thought was a harmless prank. With his friends nearby, laughing and unaware of the consequences, Ethan was convinced he could push the limits of tradition. After all, how could a royal guard, standing motionless in front of one of the most iconic landmarks in the world, possibly react to something as insignificant as a flame? Ethan, his eyes glinting with arrogance, made his move. He flicked his lighter open and ignited it, slowly bringing the flame closer to the sleeve of the Royal Guard's uniform. The guard, dressed in his iconic red coat and tall bearskin hat, remained entirely still, his gaze fixed ahead as though nothing in the world could disturb his composure. The tourists around him continued to take their pictures, completely unaware of the impending chaos. But Ethan was determined to see a reaction, to make this stoic figure flinch, or perhaps break his discipline. A laugh bubbled up from his chest as he inched closer with the flame, barely inches away from the guard's pristine uniform. For a moment, it seemed as though nothing would happen. The guard remained motionless, his posture unwavering despite the growing tension in the air. But that was before Ethan's dare turned into something much more serious. In a split second, the guard reacted. It was lightning fast, so quick that it left the crowd gasping. The guard's hand shot out with surgical precision, grabbing Ethan's wrist and twisting it sharply. The lighter went flying from Ethan's hand, clattering onto the ground with a loud thud. In that instant, the atmosphere shifted. The once playful and carefree air of the tourists now turned to a collective gasp as they realized the seriousness of what had just happened. Ethan's cocky smile vanished as panic set in. He struggled to break free, but the guard's grip was unyielding, his knee pressing firmly into Ethan's back, forcing him down to the ground. "You've just assaulted a member of the British military." The guard's calm voice cut through the tension, its coldness sending a chill through the onlookers. The tourists, once eager to capture a snapshot of history, now raised their phones, not for the usual photos of Buckingham Palace, but to record the shocking moment of confrontation. Ethan, his mind racing, tried to justify himself, mumbling, "It was just a joke," but his voice was weak, the words falling flat in the face of the growing outrage. A woman in the crowd screamed, "Are you insane? He could have set him on fire." Her words echoed through the growing crowd, reflecting the shock and disbelief that many were feeling. The tension in the air grew as more voices joined in, calling out in judgment. "That's a military uniform," someone shouted. Ethan's face flushed with humiliation as the full weight of the situation sank in. What he had thought would be a harmless prank had now escalated into an assault on the dignity of centuries-old tradition. The onlookers, who had once been indifferent, were now fully invested in the confrontation. Their murmurs grew louder, and the judgment was palpable. Ethan's friends, who had been laughing moments earlier, stood silent, unable to comprehend the gravity of the situation they had all just witnessed. As the police arrived and began to take Ethan away, the crowd slowly parted, their cameras still trained on him as he was handcuffed. The once eager tourists who had come to see the spectacle of the Royal Guard standing motionless now witnessed something much more impactful, an act of defiance against one of the most disciplined symbols of British history. The police escorted Ethan away, his face now a mixture of confusion, embarrassment, and regret. The flashes of cameras followed him, capturing every second of his downfall. His once strong presence was reduced to a figure of disgrace. This was no longer just a prank. It had become a lesson in the importance of respecting authority, tradition, and the powerful symbolism that these uniforms represented. What Ethan had failed to grasp was that the Royal Guard was not just a soldier in a red coat. He was the embodiment of centuries of military tradition, honor, and sacrifice. And in this moment, that tradition had been defended with unflinching professionalism. Ethan Davis, the tourist who had come to Buckingham Palace seeking a laugh, now stood as a cautionary tale. The consequences of his reckless behavior were only beginning to unfold. As Ethan was forced to his knees, the weight of the situation crashed down on him. The crowd had gone from cheerful tourists to an angry mob, their voices rising in unison. His eyes darted around, trying to find a way out, but there was no escape. The Royal Guard's grip was unwavering, his knee pressed firmly into Ethan's back, holding him down with unyielding authority. The more Ethan squirmed, the tighter the guard's hold became, and with every passing second his sense of control slipped further away. The guard stood like a statue, unbothered by the growing chaos around him. His gaze remained straight ahead, his posture perfect, embodying the professionalism and discipline that had been drilled into him for years. But to Ethan, it was as if the guard's silence spoke volumes, cutting through the noise like a razor-sharp blade. And in that silence, Ethan's arrogance crumbled. He had thought this would be a laugh, a simple joke that would entertain his friends. But now, as he looked up at the sea of faces around him, he realized the gravity of what he had just done. The eyes of dozens of strangers stared down at him, their phones capturing every humiliating second. It wasn't just his friends who were watching now. The entire crowd was engaged, and their judgment was swift and merciless. A woman's voice sliced through the tension. "What were you thinking? You could have set him on fire." She was hysterical, her words laced with disbelief. And she wasn't alone. More voices joined in, angry and accusatory. "That's not just some costume, that's military honor," someone shouted from the front, and another added, "You think this is funny?" Ethan's mind raced, but the words escaped him. As much as he tried to justify his actions, the weight of his mistake became undeniable. "It was just a joke," he stammered, barely able to meet the gaze of the crowd now closing in around him. But his defense fell flat, drowned out by the collective disapproval that seemed to pulse through the air. There was no escaping the reality of the situation. What he had thought would be a harmless prank was now a full-blown scandal. And it wasn't just the guard he had disrespected. It was everything the uniform stood for. The Royal Guard's voice broke through the noise again, cutting to the heart of the matter. "Jokes don't involve arson," he said coldly, his words measured and precise. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine as the reality of his actions sank in. It wasn't just about a lighter or a prank anymore. It was about disrespecting something far more significant. Centuries of military tradition, honor, and sacrifice. Ethan's panic grew as the crowd's judgment intensified. He struggled against the guard's grip, trying to find a way out, but it was futile. The tension was unbearable, and Ethan could feel the eyes of every tourist, every passerby, focused solely on him. Phones flashed again, not to capture a memory, but to record his disgrace. This was no longer a moment of comedy. It was a moment of reckoning. And then, as if to solidify the gravity of the situation, the police arrived. The crowd parted reluctantly, their eyes still fixed on Ethan as he was led away in handcuffs, his face flushed with humiliation, his earlier bravado gone. The sound of camera shutters filled the air, the clicks a constant reminder of his downfall. Ethan had become the center of attention, but not for any reason he had imagined. The Royal Guard, in his silent professionalism, stood tall, unfazed by the spectacle unfolding around him. His duty was clear, and his actions spoke louder than any words could. Ethan, on the other hand, had quickly learned that some symbols, some traditions were not to be trifled with. His prank had turned into something much bigger than he ever anticipated. The eyes of the world were now on him, and there was no going back. Ethan was escorted away. He realized that this wasn't just about one incident. It was a stark reminder of the consequences of disrespecting authority and tradition. What had seemed like a harmless joke had now spiraled into a global spectacle. And his life would never be the same. The lesson was clear. In the face of tradition and honor, even the smallest act of disrespect could lead to consequences far more severe than he could ever have imagined. The police arrived, cutting through the tense atmosphere like a hot knife, through butter. The crowd, once silent in shock, now buzzed with a new kind of energy. Outrage, disbelief, and even a sense of morbid curiosity. Ethan's mind was racing, his heart pounding in his chest as he was cuffed and pulled to his feet. His initial fear had morphed into pure humiliation. He glanced around, hoping for some kind of sympathy, but all he saw were eyes filled with condemnation. A few seconds earlier, he had been a tourist, laughing with friends, ready to capture a moment in front of the historic Buckingham Palace. Now he was the center of a spectacle, a living example of arrogance gone wrong. The royal guard remained silent, his eyes fixed ahead, his posture impeccable as he watched Ethan struggle. It was almost as if the man was a part of the palace itself, a symbol of centuries of tradition, unshaken by the chaos around him. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and as Ethan was escorted toward the police car, his ears rang with the harsh whispers of judgment. "What was he thinking?" someone muttered, their voice laced with disgust. "That's not a joke, that's assault." Another voice chimed in, this time sharper. "He tried to set a soldier on fire. Are you out of your mind?" Ethan could barely process the words, but the tone, the anger, the disbelief cut through him, like a blade. He had no way to defend himself. What had started as a stupid prank was now a full-blown international incident. Ethan's eyes darted to the tourists who had been standing nearby just moments ago. They were all staring at him now, their phones still raised, their cameras flashing as though they were witnessing some kind of dark drama unfolding before their eyes. The situation had gone viral, the incident being captured from every angle. Every movement, every word was immortalized by the sea of phones aimed at him. What had once been an amusing moment was now a global spectacle, and Ethan's face was the focal point of it all. As he was shoved into the back of the police car, Ethan caught a glimpse of the crowd one last time. The woman who had screamed, in disbelief, still stood there, her eyes burning with outrage. The man who had shouted about the uniform, he was still there, shaking his head in disbelief. Even the children who had been watching with wide-eyed wonder were now hushed, their faces reflecting a sense of shock. Ethan had gone from being the object of curiosity to the object of public scorn. But it wasn't just the crowd's reaction that would haunt him. It was the magnitude of what he had done. In his mind, it had all seemed like a harmless joke, an attempt to push the boundaries of what was allowed. But in reality, he had crossed a line drawn by centuries of tradition, honor, and sacrifice. The royal guard wasn't just a soldier in a red coat. He was a representation of everything the British military stood for. And Ethan had disrespected it, not just with his actions, but with his arrogance, his casual disregard for the significance of what he was attempting. As the police car drove off, Ethan slumped back into his seat, his face flushed with shame. He could already feel the weight of his actions settling in, the realization hitting him harder than any physical blow. What had started as a joke had turned into a life-altering mistake. The judgment of the crowd, the viral nature of the incident, and the police charges. It was all too much. He had no idea how to fix this, no way to undo the damage he had caused. At that moment, he understood something he hadn't before. The significance of tradition and authority went beyond what was visible on the surface. It wasn't about the red uniforms or the tall hats. It was about respect. Respect for the past, for the sacrifices made by those who had worn that uniform before him. Ethan had learned the hard way that respect couldn't be faked. And now he would live with the consequences of his reckless disregard for it. The car's engine hummed as it made its way through the streets of London, the flashes of cameras still haunting Ethan in the rearview mirror. The Royal Guard's composure, the crowd's outrage, and the weight of the tradition he had disrespected. It all swirled in Ethan's mind as he realized the full scope of what he had done. His life, like the crowd's judgment, would never be the same. As the police car sped away from Buckingham Palace, Ethan's heart still pounded in his chest, a constant reminder of how quickly his life had unraveled. The crowd's jeers echoed in his mind, each word more painful than the last. The flashes from the cameras seemed to burn into his skin, each snapshot capturing his downfall in stunning clarity. His face, once a carefree symbol of an innocent tourist, was now a global mark of disgrace. He had become the villain in a story he never meant to star in. Back at the palace, the royal guard stood still, unmoving, as if he were already a part of the stone walls of Buckingham itself. The guard's professionalism was flawless, his posture unshaken. He didn't flinch, not even once. His role had been to protect the tradition of the British military, and he had done so with cold efficiency. Ethan had crossed a line that could never be erased. But the guard, in his silence and poise, had upheld the values that Ethan had so carelessly disregarded. Ethan's arrest wasn't just the result of a prank gone wrong. It was the consequence of a lack of respect for authority, for history, for tradition. The words the guard had spoken to him, "You've just assaulted a member of the British military," rang louder and louder in Ethan's mind. They weren't just words. They were a declaration of the seriousness of the offense, the gravity of the mistake he had made. He had not only threatened the life of a soldier, but had attacked the very essence of what the uniform represented. It wasn't just about a prank or a laugh. It was about centuries of sacrifice, service, and honor that Ethan had chosen to ignore. As the car drove through the streets of London, Ethan's thoughts spiraled. The magnitude of his actions hit him harder than the flashing cameras or the angry voices. This wasn't just a minor mistake. It was a colossal error in judgment. He had disrespected a symbol of national pride, a figure whose very existence was tied to the protection of history and culture, and now, all he could do was sit back and watch as the consequences unfolded, each moment dragging him deeper into a hole he wasn't sure how to climb out of. When Ethan finally arrived at the police station, the gravity of what had happened settled even deeper within him. His mind raced through the events of the past few hours, desperately trying to make sense of how it had all gone so wrong. He thought back to the crowd, their reactions shifting from curiosity to shock, and then to anger. He had been caught in a web of public outrage, his once light-hearted prank now the focus of international condemnation. Every detail was recorded, every movement analyzed, and the moment he had thought was harmless had spiraled into a nightmare. The judge's words came rushing back to him. The charges: assaulting a member of the British military, attempted arson. The penalty: a fine, a lifetime ban from the United Kingdom, and the public shaming that would haunt him for the rest of his life. His attempts to explain, to apologize, had fallen on deaf ears. There was no justification for what he had done, and now all he could do was watch as the world turned its judgment on him. But it wasn't just about the legal consequences. It wasn't just about the fine or the ban from the UK. It was about the lasting damage to his reputation. Ethan had once been a man who lived for the thrill, the adventure, the next big laugh. But now he was nothing more than a cautionary tale, a symbol of arrogance and recklessness that would haunt his name for years to come. His friends had distanced themselves, unable to support someone who had made such a reckless mistake. Employers would be hesitant to hire him. His name had become synonymous with disgrace. As the days passed, Ethan's isolation deepened. The viral video of his confrontation with the royal guard continued to spread, a constant reminder of his failure. He couldn't escape the judgment, couldn't outrun the reality of what he had done. What had started as a moment of arrogance had led to a lifetime of consequences. Ethan had learned the hardest lesson of all. When you disrespect authority, when you mock tradition, the world will hold you accountable. And in the end, the Royal Guard's silent professionalism, his unshaken discipline, had been the true victor. The Guard had stood firm, representing not just himself but the centuries of tradition that Ethan had disrespected. The world had watched, and in the end, it was Ethan who had paid the price. Days passed, but the consequences of Ethan's actions seemed to linger, growing heavier with each passing moment. The arrest outside Buckingham Palace had been the beginning, but the ripple effects were only starting to hit him. The viral video of the confrontation with the royal guard was everywhere. News outlets ran endless stories. Social media exploded with outrage, and the video replayed on every platform. Ethan had become a symbol of stupidity, arrogance, and disrespect. His face, once just another face in a crowd, was now plastered across the internet, forever linked to his reckless behavior. His reputation had been shredded in a matter of hours. It wasn't just the social media backlash that stung. It was the reality of the legal consequences. The judge's verdict had been swift and harsh. Ethan was slapped with a hefty fine of $12,000 for assaulting a member of the British military and for the attempted arson. The punishment didn't end there, though. The judge issued a lifetime ban from entering the United Kingdom, a sentence that seemed almost as severe as the crime itself. Ethan felt the weight of the words, "You've just assaulted a member of the British military." Those words echoed in his mind every time he tried to sleep, every time he faced the reality of what had happened. It was one thing to make a fool of himself. It was another to disrespect an institution as sacred as the Royal Guard. But the hardest part was yet to come. Ethan sat alone in his small apartment, the walls closing in around him. The calls from his friends had stopped coming. They had been the first to distance themselves, unable to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the man who had disrespected centuries of military tradition. Job offers, once a regular part of his life, dried up. Employers were hesitant to hire someone whose name had become a global symbol of disgrace. Even the most mundane interactions felt suffocating. Every time he spoke, he could almost feel the judgment in the air. The weight of his mistake followed him everywhere, and there was no escape from it. The shame wasn't just public, it was personal. Ethan had always prided himself on being adventurous, on being someone who lived life boldly. He'd never been one to think too much about consequences, always believing that a joke or a thrill was worth the risk. But now, that carefree attitude seemed foolish. As the days dragged on, he realized that his actions hadn't just affected him, they had affected everyone around him. His family, who had always supported him, now had to explain his behavior to friends and colleagues. His mother had called, her voice trembling with disappointment. His father, who had always been proud of Ethan's independent spirit, didn't know what to say. They had tried to defend him at first, but as the full weight of the situation unfolded, even they couldn't help but feel the sting of his actions. The humiliation was constant. Wherever Ethan went, people recognized him. His face was everywhere. On the news, on social media, in the comment sections of articles. He had become the punchline of jokes and the subject of scorn. And no matter how much he wanted to forget, it was always there, following him like a shadow. Meanwhile, the Royal Guard, the very figure Ethan had tried to provoke, remained unshaken. Ethan had seen reports about the Guard's calm professionalism. During the incident, in contrast to Ethan's panic and arrogance, the Guard had been the picture of poise and control. His actions had been swift, decisive, and precise. The way he had handled the situation, with absolute authority, had been praised worldwide. He had become a hero in the eyes of many, a symbol of dignity and honor. And Ethan, in his reckless attempt to mock that dignity, had only succeeded in diminishing his own. As the weeks passed, the reality of Ethan's isolation became undeniable. The phone calls had stopped. The texts were no longer coming. His once active social media accounts were filled with insults and accusations. He was the subject of countless memes, his face digitally altered and shared with mocking captions. He had become a pariah. The public had moved on to the next big story. But for Ethan, the damage was permanent. The online world had never let him forget the moment he crossed the line. And yet, despite all of it, one thing stood out: his encounter with the Royal Guard. In that moment, the Guard's professionalism had become a sharp contrast to Ethan's impulsiveness. The Guard had represented not just an individual soldier, but a long-standing tradition of respect and honor. Ethan's actions had shown just how fragile the line between arrogance and respect could be. The guard, in his unwavering discipline, had shown Ethan something he could never have imagined, the true meaning of responsibility. Ethan would never forget that moment at Buckingham Palace. It had cost him his dignity, his reputation, and his freedom to visit the United Kingdom. But more than anything, it had forced him to face the consequences of his actions and understand the importance of respect for authority, tradition, and history. His life would never be the same, and neither would the way he viewed the world or himself. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this intense story. What do you think about Ethan's reckless prank outside Buckingham Palace? Do you believe his actions were just a misguided joke, or did he cross a line that can never be undone? How do you feel about the Royal Guard's response, his professionalism, and discipline in the face of provocation? We all have moments where we act impulsively, but this story reminds us that there are serious consequences to our actions, especially when we disrespect authority and tradition. How would you have reacted if you were in the guard's position, or even Ethan's shoes? Would you have realized the gravity of the situation before it escalated? Let's start a conversation. Share your opinions in the comments below. Do you think the punishment Ethan faced was justified, or was it too harsh? What lessons do you think we can learn from this story about respect, responsibility, and the importance of understanding cultural symbols? Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and make sure to hit the notification bell so you're ready for tomorrow's exciting story. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. We love engaging with you, so drop your thoughts down below.